I could probably introduce myself while we're waiting for Alex.
Sure. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. My name is Mary. My agent name is Mary C. Moore, and I am a literary agent with Kimberly Cameron and Associates. We're based out of the Bay Area, California. I represent mostly fiction, all the way from middle grade, young adult to adult. I have a diverse roster of clients who are all equally fantastic, but today is Alex's day. So I'm really excited to have a conversation with her about how Half Outlaw came to be, and how our relationship came to be, and yeah, how we connected and everything like that. And again, as you know, as Blake here mentioned, you know, if you have specific questions, you can put them in the chat and hopefully we'll get to them at the end. And oh, hello, Van.
Hi.
We'll get chatting.
Well, and while we're waiting for Alex to come back, I'll go ahead and introduce her. A lot of y'all are
sorry, I'm back.
Alex is back.
I have parents that I had to help figure out Zoom for them.
God bless
We're
them.
in the other room.
That's so cute.
That's great. That's
Hi,
great.
parents. Hi, Kristen.
Well, Alex, what you missed was Mary went ahead and introduced herself. So I'm going to introduce you, our featured guest. I've had the pleasure of getting to know Alex through Writing Workshops Dallas. She's a great teacher. She's a great writer. And like I said, tonight we're here to celebrate the release. Today is release day for this great book, Half Outlaw. Alex is also the award-winning author of Secrets of the Casa Rosada. She received her MFA in creative writing from the University of Central Oklahoma. And she's just, every time I see her, she's just coming back from somewhere, I would say exotic or fun, because she's also an international travel writer. She's, pardon me, she's been published pretty much everywhere. And from National Geographic to Travel and Leisure to Conde Nast Traveler, Texas Monthly here in the state of Texas. And through it all, she still manages to write novels. One of the most prolific writers that I know. And we're really excited to have this conversation, to listen in to Alex and Mary tonight. So as you have questions, put them in the chat. We'll get to them a little bit later. But Alex, congratulations on this publication day. And I'm really excited to hear you and Mary discuss all things writerly.
Yes, thank you so much, Blake. I appreciate it. I'm really glad to have this conversation hosted by Writing Workshops. They offer phenomenal classes that I have taught with, some free seminars, some paid classes or seminars. They have the best of the best writing instructors, creative writers, authors, agents sometimes come on there and have talks. So definitely check them out. Thank you to Interrobang Books. If you are interested, they do have you can order, not pre-order because today is pub day. You can order signed copies of Half Outlaw from them. I just put the link in the chat. So you're more than welcome to check that out or share it with friends. And then, yeah, thank you, Mary, for being here. She's been my literary agent since 2017. Yeah. So I'm like excited to chat with you. And I'm going to start off with the first question. How did you come to be a literary agent, and what was your career like when we met in 2017?
Sure. So I came to publishing in sort of a roundabout way, and you'll find it's interesting because the more I've talked to publishing industry people, the more I found that many of us do come, especially when we're not coming in directly out of college. So I was a biologist, a field biologist, and I worked at the San Francisco Zoo with, you know, the big cats. And then an incident happened at the zoo, which I'm sure you all can look up and figure out what it was. And because I was a very young zookeeper, I had nothing to do with the incident, but I was a very young zookeeper in working with the big cats, and they decided to shift me to move me to the barnyard animals. And I kind of was thinking, you know, I was there and I was like, you know, this isn't really what I wanted to do. And so I was cleaning out a bird cage, and in that bird cage at the bottom, there was an old newspaper clipping for an MFA program. And I think it just clicked because I had always been a super avid reader. I had tried writing 2 novels. I'd submitted them to agents. I was really always very curious about the industry, but I came from a really poor rural background. And so that wasn't something that, a career in books or publishing or even English wasn't necessarily something that you would consider. And so I ended up getting my MFA, wrote a novel while I was in my MFA program, and then went to submit that novel to literary agents. And this was pre-Twitter. So this was kind of, I was still trying to it was really hard to figure out. Some agents had blogs at that point, but it was really difficult to figure out how to submit, what people wanted. It seemed like such a opaque process. So that when I ran into a person who had a internship at a local literary agency, I was like, oh, I want to do that. I want to know more about the process. And so I started an internship at KCNA and just fell in love. I really, really loved the idea of not just writing my own books, but working with other books and working with people as they develop their books. And that's how I landed here.
And like everybody, I don't know any of this about my literary agent. So I'm learning this, like, I'm like, you were a zookeeper? You were like big cats? Like you got your MFA, like all these things. This is so great. And also side note, we've never met in person, my literary agent, like Mary and I. So it's always cool to talk like this.
It's something that's definitely changed with the pandemic is, previously I just would have phone conversations with my clients. And now there's been a lot more face-to-face on the computer. So Alex, back at you, when, and I know I need to answer the second half of your question, but I think let's slip in some of your process. Why did you want a literary agent when you first started? Because when you first started was about the time that I was first starting. So I think we can kind of cross over.
Yeah. Okay. I got my MFA in creative writing from 2011 to 2014. And after that, I had my thesis, which ended up being Secrets of the Casa Rosada. But I moved out to LA, and we have Dennis, a friend of mine who's out now from LA, here on the call with us. So I moved out there. I was writing subtitles and captions for TV and film. And I was trying to I knew from my MFA and from all the research, like everyone told you, get a literary agent. That's how you get your book published. So I edited it a few times, had people read it, beta readers. I started submitting to every literary agent I could find that would be a fit for my book, kept getting a lot of no's. So I took a little bit of time while I was in LA to revamp the manuscript again. I moved to Texas in 2015 to become a freelance writer. And while I was here, I started going out on submission or querying agents again. And I was getting no luck. I would get people who wanted to read the manuscript and say, you're a good writer, this is a great story, but there's no audience for it. And I kept going, what do you mean there's no audience? I don't understand what that means. It's a book and you just said it's a good story. Okay. But you go through all the subtext, and if you looked at the time of what was getting published, there wasn't a lot of books with only Latino characters by a Latina writer and all this stuff. So I reached out to a professor at my MFA. I said, what do? I want to publish this book. Now I'm kind of mad because I want to get this. There are audiences to read this book. And she said, go to a small publisher. So I thought, okay, well, I guess I won't have a literary agent. I'll just go to a publisher because I don't know what to do. But around this time, Mary already had my manuscript. She'd requested it. So she was reading it. I went to the publisher. Arte Publico Press was one of them. And I sent it out to 2. And Arte Publico responded to me in 2 weeks. And I was like, okay, I have this offer. I don't know how to do a contract. I don't know if what they're offering is fair. I don't know the contract legalese. And I looked up, okay, literary agent or literary lawyer. And definitely literary lawyer was going to be more expensive. And that was something I wouldn't be able to I couldn't connect with them and have a relationship with them throughout my career. That wasn't going to work. So I reached out to Mary and said, I know you have my book. What do you think? And we ended up working together.
Yeah.
Yeah. Was that kind of a weird way for a writer to come for you to connect with the writer? I don't know. I mean, I know you had one other person at the time who did that, but have you had more since? Like, how does that usually work?
It really depends. You know, it's hard to say because in the end, like, it's not just the offer. So when I'm looking at potential clients, I'm not looking at your book. I'm looking at you as the writer, even though I do have to fall in love with, you know, your manuscript. I'm not really just gauging you and your career based off this one book. So, you know, the offer from a small press, it really has to be a small press that I feel would further your career and, you know, move you in the direction I would move you anyway. So when I get, it does actually hit my inbox quite often that, you know, an author, not a client, so a submitting author will have, you know, an offer from a small press. And sometimes a small press is something that, you know, I wouldn't necessarily recommend, you know, if they didn't have, they were a startup small press and they didn't have kind of the experience needed to kind of navigate the world, navigate the publishing industry. Other times they're, you know, fantastic small presses, but I don't have a vision for, you know, the author long-term. So it's not uncommon, but it is uncommon for me to sign the author. And so, you know, and in your case, it's also, there's also a question of, you know, when an author comes to me with a offer in hand, there is a question of, do we risk declining this offer to try to send this out to bigger publishers before we, you know, negotiate this contract? So that's also another question. But, you know, Arte Publico has a storied history, really, a really great small press, really sort of, you know, a great reputation. And, you know, obviously they published, you know, The House on Mango Street. So with that kind of, you know, accolade, it was an easy choice to make.
Yeah. And I mean, you didn't ask me this, but I'll just offer this. I had talked to one of your clients that you had signed in a similar way that I had signed with me. You said, hey, I have another client. You can talk to her. She signed with me, and me and her, I think we got on a phone call, or we did an email exchange. I can't remember, but she gave like very in-depth information about like what it was like to work with you, how she felt with the whole experience coming in that way. And quickly after like talking to you on the phone, I thought we had a similar personality. I knew like we were going to get along just well, and we have. Yeah.
6 years later.
Yeah. 2 books.
Yes, 2 books later. But that's a good point to bring up for those of you in the querying trenches. You know, it's always great to request, you know, if you can chat with clients and agents, other clients, and maybe the ones that aren't published yet, you know, because then you're going to get an experience of what that agent is like, get an idea of what that agent is like, you know, when it's not, because obviously with our published clients, we're kind of a lot more on top of it because we have to be, you know, we have deadlines and we have, you know, editors kind of poking at us and things like that. Whereas with the unpublished clients, it's, you know, and it can be really easy for an agent to sort of let them slip through the cracks. And so you want to, you know, make sure that doesn't happen, make sure that, you know, you're going to be in good hands.
Yeah. So we worked together. Secrets got published, I think, a year after me and you started working together. And it did pretty good. It won a few awards. Had you worked with a small press at the time? I mean, I was so new to the whole experience and I didn't know like anything about being an author. But how did you feel like the whole, like, did you think this was a cool experience and introduction for me into the writing world? Yeah.
Yeah. So small presses are different than the larger presses in many ways. And a lot of small presses are different from each other. So I'm sorry, I have a cat. She's knocked over all of his food. Just a minute.
Okay. All right, guys, I'll keep chatting. Yeah, so Secrets ended up winning, I think, 5 awards. It was on Kirkus's Best of YA Books. It got a Starred Kirkus, NACCS Tejas Foco Young Adult Award. Yeah, sorry. Okay.
No.
Never
So-
apologize for having a cat, Heather Flanagan says.
Got two,
Yeah.
and you see their fluffy tails going by. So going back to the small press concept, it's each and every one is different, and but there tends to be a standard, and the thing you want to look for is distribution. If if it's a small press, can they distribute to bookstores? And that's the big question, because a lot of small presses these days will go into sort of just doing ebook, just publishing through Amazon, all of this stuff. So you kind of want to look at distribution, and then also, depending on the type of small press, some small presses these days are hybrid, so they request that you pay for like the design and editorial process and marketing. Those aren't necessarily not legitimate presses, but you do want to consider very carefully before you move into those spaces. And then the other one is, just look at their books, look at the books that they've published. Are there award winners? Are you able to find them, in bookstores, things like that. So, as a literary agent, I tend to not go to small presses all that often, unless it is a book that I feel is going to be, kind of more of the award winning, like the literary type of books. For example, Life of Pi, that started out as a small press in, I believe, England, and look how well it did, but it was a very specific type of book. And those are not as common as what we would consider more of commercial fiction.
True. Yeah.
What about you, Alex? How did you find the experience working with a small press?
I would say for my first book, it was pretty interesting because you do get to talk to, like, I talked to the head of the publishing house. Like, I was on the phone with him. He edited my book. I was talking to their marketing team and the distribution team. Like, I knew everybody's name. I met them. So that was very nice to have. I don't want to say like to have some input and to be able to connect with the people versus not knowing who is working at the big publisher house, which is not to say you don't get to connect with the people who work at the big publishing houses, but it can be like they have a lot of authors and you might not be as high on the list. So that was nice. And they also, Arte Publico did a good job of sending me out to conferences. I went to where I met Rebecca Balcarcel, who's on this video. Yeah, me and her met at I think it was at TLA, and it was definitely my first one. And TLA is a huge conference. So I got a lot of good access, and it doesn't hurt that I live in Texas. So we have a lot of big literary conferences here. So they got me connected to those. They had some funding to send me to those and connect with the readers. They showed me how to get involved in high schools and go to high schools and colleges and stuff and speak to those students and get paid for it. So that was very cool. And I really appreciated that. It was a nice start to understanding how all of this works, because it's so confusing and kind of lonely whenever you might not know another author,
I will interject here, though. Alex is a particularly high achieving marketing author. Of all of my clients, she may be the one who's the most active. And there's no judgment to anybody who's not. Like, authors are across the spectrum, and I don't have expectations either direction. But what might be easier for Alex at a small press would maybe be more difficult if you're more of an introvert, if you're not someone who's got the time or the means or the personality to really do all of that, because you do have to do a lot of your own footwork. You have to have you have to keep the momentum going yourself. You don't have sort of the bigger PR and marketing machines that we'll talk about a little bit further on behind you. So that is something to keep in mind.
It's true.
So.
After Secrets came out, you sent me an email and you were like, so what's next? What other book do you have? And I wrote back, because I was looking up the emails the other day, and I wrote back, I have a book, it's already done, I'm sending it to you. Let me say, usually whenever I work with Mary, I tell her an idea that I have before I write the book. But this one, I just had the whole book written. And then in the email, I didn't even tell her that it was a different genre from my first book. So my first book was published as YA. I didn't tell her that it was adult. I didn't tell her anything about the story. And so in her emails back to me, she's just like, is this a YA? And I was like, no. And she was like, well, okay.
Champions Wrestling here in the heart of Montgomery.
Oops.
Someone's watching wrestling.
These things happen.
I just removed that person. I'm not sure if they were trying to like bomb or something like that, but I
Okay.
removed them. So
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, so what did you think upon like getting this whole manuscript from me?
So this is a conversation about, you know, we were talking about
which is Half Outlaw. I was sending you Half Outlaw. Yeah.
So again, a discussion of, you know, this was earlier on in my career, and, you know, I probably hadn't worked out my system yet, you know, like I hadn't worked out that I would prefer to see a pitch first, to talk to my client about their potential next project, because, you know, it didn't make a lot of sense for someone to write an entire manuscript and then for me to be like, I don't know what to do with this. But in the case of Alex, you know, it came in and I thought, well, I think we can do this. You know, Half Outlaw was so interesting. It was already really well written. And, you know, if if anything, I'm pretty flexible, as most of my clients know. You know, the only thing to think about in that particular situation, so, you know, she had done all of this, she'd laid all of this groundwork with secrets, you know, going to these high schools, universities, getting these awards, but this was all in the young adult space. And so Half Outlaw couldn't actually kind of sit on top of any of that. You know, so that's why usually usually you hear from literary agents and publishers that they want you to stick to a certain genre. It's not that they want you to be in a square box and just
Champions Wrestling Promotions, baby, Montgomery, Alabama. Come on down for some tape.
Cool, Tom.
Yeah. So it's not that, you know, it's more along the lines of, you know, when you establish your career, you're establishing an audience, and, you know, you kind of want to be able to take that audience with you. But in this case, you know, she did have a crossover, and what the crossover was she was writing in magical realism. And magical realism itself is a very, you know, small, unique genre. And so I felt that we could make this work for her and get a similar, you know, get a lot of the sort of more adult audience that she had gotten for Secrets. So yeah, but I will say my process now is I definitely want to see a pitch and then a couple sample pages before my client goes off and running with a new project.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a few of my literary siblings in the crowd tonight, so and thank y'all for being here, by the way.
So Alex, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
What would you advise, you know, what would you have done differently about the submission process if you did it all over again? Would you do anything differently? And are there any tips for the writers in the audience?
For Half Outlaw, like submission to you?
For Secrets, for getting a literary agent, and then we'll get on to Half Outlaw too.
Yeah, for getting a literary agent, I do know, like at the beginning of querying agents, I didn't do as well of researching as I should have. And I kind of just sent it. I was like, oh, you published famous author, enter here. I'm gonna send it to you. And it's not to say that they couldn't have liked my stuff, but maybe that like famous author was not related to my work as well. So I figured that out on the second round of querying agents, that I needed to cater more to agents that would be a better fit for me and for my work, and adjusting, you know, adjusting my query letter to be a little bit more engaging, because I mean, it does help if you know how to, I mean, there's a formula to these query letters, but there's something to say about like writing something that's going to catch that literary agent's eye, because you're reading a billion. I mean, I know you read a lot of these query letters. I need to stick out in some way. And then, yeah, so I would have changed that in the submission process. What was the other question that you said?
Well, I think you answered. the
Okay.
question. Yeah, let's move on to your experience with Half Outlaw.
Yes.
Yeah. So, okay. So yeah, when you pre-publication, you had like a fairly flexible writing schedule. As you know now, with a bigger publisher, upon publication, there's not even upon publication, 6 months before, there's a lot of ramp up that kind of goes on behind the scenes that, many new authors maybe don't know occur. And it's very different than a small press as well. And to clarify, Blackstone, where Half Outlaw is published, although they're not part of the traditional big five, they are a very large company. So I do consider them a bigger publisher. And the ramp up is intense. And there's a lot of sort of blog post requests. There's a lot of interview requests. There's a lot of, articles to write for various venues. And so you kind of lose a lot of your what would be considered your writing time. So how was that experience for you now? Knowing you have to write more novels.
Yeah, it was exciting because I do want to be a full-time author, but it was tough. Definitely last fall was pretty tough because that was in my editing phase. And Blackstone was asking me with my editor, which is phenomenal, Tony Kirkpatrick. I had to do edits in a 2-week window. So she said, here's what we need to work on. And I had 2-week window to make all the edits. And then I had to give it back to her. And then I had a 2-week break. And then she said, here, you need to make all the extra edits in another 2 weeks. And then I had 2 more weeks. And so in that time, not only do I have to change everything, but I have to read the book to make sure. So I was like rereading my book like 3 times within a 2-week window, which was pretty heavy. And then probably in the last 3 months, getting prepared for Half Outlaw to come out was a lot. Yeah, I was writing a lot of blogs. I was answering a lot of questions. I was writing some articles or setting up excerpts and like Mary said, I'm probably different than most authors in that I was emailing everybody. And because I have a job as a journalist, a freelance writer, I have a lot of contacts at newspapers and magazines and freelance writer friends. So I was emailing all the people I could find, and that was additional work. So I feel like I've had 2 full-time jobs in the last 4 months for sure. And I was also working on another project proposal. So that was a lot of writing on top of just getting ready for Half Outlaw. But today, with all the love that I'm receiving from people, it's worth it. Like so what if I was tired or exhausted? Like, this is what I love to do. And like writing books is the dream, right? Yeah. So, like, I'm just going to go a little bit back. So with Secrets, I already had the publishing deal, right? Whenever me and Mary started working together. But with Half Outlaw, we had to go out on this thing called submission, which means I wrote the book, I edited it, Mary read it, she gave me feedback, I worked on, the book again. Then I had beta readers who, one of them is Rochelle, she's in the audience, thank you so much. And Lori Bentley, who was one of my other lit sibs. And then I worked on it again, and then Mary read it again. So it was a lot of editing for at least a year and a half, maybe. Then we go out on submission, which means Mary sends it out to publishers. And what did you think Half Outlaw, or how did you feel about Half Outlaw when we were going out on submission with all these publishers, when you were sending it to Big Five, to medium publishers like Blackstone? Can you just kind of talk about that process that we kind of went through and how you felt about it along each step of the way?
Yeah, definitely. So, in general, I have a feeling that publishing is taking its time to catch up with my clients, which I feel like many of my clients are like that. And, you know, it's particularly the diversity in publishing. And so when we went out with Alex's book, Half Outlaw, with this Latina main character, biracial main character, this was before the release of American Dirt. So, you know, we did get very close to one of the big publishing houses, an editor, a younger editor who was also biracial, loved the book, really wanted it, talked to Alex on the phone a few times.
Within 1 month, we got this talk, and I was in Thailand when we were on the phone.
So this was, you know, she was really excited about it. She brought it to her boss. You know, she really wanted to she championed it the best she could, but because she was sort of a more junior editor, you know, and her boss was literally said, oh, I don't see an audience for this. I can't understand who, you know, we don't see a, you know, kind of that's that same response that you get, that, you know, that's coded language basically. And so she was pretty heartbroken about it. You know, she ended up not being able to acquire it after, you know, she gave us advice. You know, she worked with Alex on a couple revisions to try to get it to the point where we could sell it to the big five. But so when that happened, you know, I had a moment. I knew it would be an uphill climb. And so I just, you know, Alex and I talked about it, and we decided that rather than trying to push it to fit the commercial feel, we would go the other direction, and she would just totally embrace her magical realism roots. And so she completely leaned into the magical realism. We said, screw the market. This is what she's talented at. This is what this is what we know is a really great story. And so you did such a good job. You just leaned into it. And it's as for those of you who've read it, those are some of the more beautiful elements of this book is the magical realism. And with that, we just went everywhere, you know, and Blackstone was sort of up and coming. I mean, they'd always been acquiring, but they started out as an audio company. They've been well known in the industry for a long time as an audiobook company. And they started, you know, just started acquiring manuscripts. They started acquiring books, you know, they're expanding their operations. And so, you know, the editor who had acquired Alex's audiobook for Secrets of the Casa Rosada, I asked him, I said, would you be interested in seeing Alex's actual book, you know, an actual book? And, you know, he jumped on it, and next thing we knew, we had an offer from them. And it was just an example. I think it's an example of really having an agent who both has a market vision for your book, but also can be flexible and say, all right, you know, maybe this doesn't fit the box, but there's a space for it somewhere. And, you know, and I will be honest, like that doesn't always work. You know, I do have a few clients that I've tried to do that with and it didn't work. But if I think that client's going to do that, go the distance, then I'll just say, let's write something else. And I feel a little bad because sometimes they're pumping out 3-4 manuscripts before we're sold. But it's more common than not that I sell book number 2, book number 3 for a client than I do book number 1. So, you know, and in Alex's case, she had already sold, you know, book number 1, I hadn't technically sold it. So I still count that as I'm selling book number 2 for her. So yeah, it was a fairly standard experience with a happy ending.
And it took a year. We'll just say, add that timeline. It took a year from the time we went out to the time it was bought. And Blackstone was one of the last few that we had on the list. Yeah.
And I think we went into lockdown too.
Yeah, we were already in lockdown when it got bought. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's see. So what would you say your experience going on submission with publishers versus going on submission with an agent for those in the audience who haven't gone out on submission to publishers?
Yeah. So going out on submission with publishers with a literary agent, you know, my experience was I gave it to Mary and she asked me, how much do you want to know about the whole process? Do you want to know when somebody says, no, we don't like her book? No, we're not going to take it. And I'm the kind of person that I'm like, yes, tell me everything. I want to know everything. I want to see their emails. I want to see if they wrote any notes. Because I like to be involved in the publishing world. I want to know more about it because I feel like the more knowledge you have, the better equipped you are to navigate this very confusing industry as an author. And Mary was great. She shared everything with me. I'll just say it sucked when we didn't sell it to that first editor who wanted it. That was very exciting because I was like, whoa, first group that we sent it out to, and it was a big 5. Yeah, so that was pretty exciting. And I had done a revision, and then when they say no, that can be kind of demoralizing because I worked on revising the book for probably a month, and then she took it back and they ended up saying no. But I'm still the kind of person that I'm like, it's gonna happen. It just has to find the right home. And when Blackstone reached out to Mary and said, yes, we want this. Whoa, actually, let me backtrack. Before we got Blackstone, we got somebody reaching out who's a film agent interested in Half Outlaw. And that was cool because we didn't have a deal for Half Outlaw as a book, but we started talking to this film agent about Half Outlaw and his hopes of wanting to get it sold as a book, sold as a movie or a TV show. So that kind of gave me, some oomph in the middle of it, because I think he came around in the middle of that year. So that was exciting. I was like, look, if he does this for a living and he's sold like so many books to films or TV shows, I felt like, okay, we have something here. I think it's going to happen. Blackstone gave us an offer. Now, after they gave us an offer, that's when I got more anxious because Mary was, sending me stuff as I asked, and I didn't really understand how the whole contract thing works for bigger publishers like Blackstone. And I was seeing all this stuff and I was like, why isn't it signed within a week? And it took about like a month and a half. And you were like, this is very normal. But me the whole time is thinking, oh no, this isn't good. Like, we haven't signed everything in a week. We haven't decided everything in 2 weeks. So I was very nervous, but we finally talked it out and I understood like, okay, this is very normal. But it was really cool to be a part of that process, to talk to the publisher, because I did have a talk with Blackstone before. I think they gave us the official offer. We had a talk and I got to talk to the people who were acquiring it and see if we were going to be a fit, what vision they had for Half Outlaw, what ideas they had for it, what they liked about it, what they thought we could work with, and everything they said resonated with me. So it was exciting. Yeah.
Yeah, and this is actually really common for authors to have that experience, the anxiety of contracts, especially, Alex, you missed, during the pandemic, there was the timeline went from, like a month to like 6 to 8 months for a contract. So imagine the anxiety then. But the thing to clarify here is that, when we get a deal memo, we get an offer. The deal memo is what the agent will negotiate, with the editor. And that deal memo is kind of in good faith. So even though you haven't signed a contract, you have a in good faith agreement with the publisher, and the process gets started. And then, so most of the deal memo points are what you can negotiate it. And then the actual contract is what, the legal department of the contracts department on their end. And then on my end, I have a legal team that I get, or legal counsel basically, that I work with. And so then there's the nitty gritty of the language within that to make sure that, there's not some funky clause that's going to pop up, as you all have maybe seen, is going to pop up in a year that's going to make life difficult. But that part of it can take a long time. But the American Association of Literary Agencies, they're aware of the problem of the length of time that the contracts take. So it's something that hopefully will be dealt with. But it is very much not in our control. But everybody's overworked and underpaid. So. But so that is quite common to have that kind of length of time in between offer and contract.
Yeah. And then since we signed the contract, we signed a contract in 2020 and it came out in 2022, about I think a few months past the 2-year mark. So 2 years and 2 months. Within that time, like, how did you feel about my experience with Blackstone? Were you excited for me on like the angles that they were going to take it?
Yeah, I'm really pleased with Blackstone. This was my first experience with them as well. As we mentioned, they were a little bit just sort of up and coming as a publisher. And so I really felt that they've poached a lot of talent from the other publishers. They just acquired Hello Sunshine, which is Reese Witherspoon's production company. So they're really, I think they're trying to become a full picture publisher. So the experience that Alex has had did not feel different than what I've seen my other clients go through at the bigger publishers. And if anything, it was a little bit heightened, but I believe that's because Alex is who she is and just is gung-ho and really kind of makes that, has the lists of all the people she's going to reach out to, 50 people she's going to reach out to read the arc and things like that. So there's a combination. And then to touch base about film agents, because you mentioned the film agent, part of that process is really interesting too. This is maybe, because I know all you authors I know dream about, what actor is going to play, your characters in the films and things like that. And the reality is the process from book to film can be years, decades, takes a long time. But the general idea is that I, as a literary agent, keep your film rights when we sell your book. And then those film rights go to what's called a book to film agent, and they submit it in Hollywood. And, sometimes what happens in the case of Alex is there's also these people called scouts, literary scouts, and they are very, I don't know what the word to describe them. They're kind of almost like camouflaged, cats in the grass. Like you have no idea they're there. And somehow, somewhere, they got a copy of the manuscript and they read it and they were like recommended it to this film agent because they know that film agent is looking for this particular type of book, or they know that that foreign rights publisher is looking for that particular type of book. I still haven't quite figured out how scouts work, but they're really interesting. I've had contact with a few of them, but usually sometimes I don't even hear from the scout. I'll just hear from the person that they connected me to. And in the case of Alex, it was a film agent at a major film company, film agency, and he, wanted to read it and wanted to become Alex's film agent. Other times, I have to go and shop the manuscripts to film agents just as I would shop them to publishers. And so, it can be not as easy of a process to get a film agent as it was for Alex. All right. Okay, what do you think was the most difficult part for you going on submission, and how did you cope with that?
I think it was the waiting. I want it now. I want my book out now, and I want it yesterday, and I want to have the other book done, and I want to sell the other book before the second book was done. But basically the way I coped with it is I wrote a third book while we were out on submission so that I could have something to focus on while Mary was doing her job and taking care of the submission side. I was working on another project and I finished it. I had beta readers, we worked on it together, and now it's hopefully will be sold soon. And then I worked on another project after that, because during this whole, it took 2 years for the book to get published. So I was starting on another project, and I will be starting on another project soon. So I'll have a couple of things working. I don't usually stop. I don't usually have a long break between books. Maybe I'll take like 4 months or 3. I mean, that sounds like a lot. 3 or 4 months sometimes to like break and give my brain a rest from being in the writing aspect, because I'll have just been working on a book for a year and a half, editing and rewriting and all that stuff. And then sometimes it's nice when Mary has a chance to read it, so then I can take a break there too. Yeah, so that's kind of how I just wrote more.
Yeah. And honestly, as the more more authors I work with, the more clients I work with, I have to say, I think that that's the best solution to all of this is, you know, try not to be too attached to your first project, you know, because the publishing industry is brutal. Literary agents are brutal. I mean, I think most of us are kind and have kind hearts, but we are brutal by necessity. And then the waiting time, you know, and so you're only going to get better as you write. And the other thing is that quite honestly, if you want to make it as a career author, and I heard this statistic a few years ago, I don't know how true it is today in the current climate, but you know, you need to have 6 successfully published books to be a career author, to be making a financial, you know, financially as you're already a career author once you're, you know, once you decide you're a career author. No, not a, you know, if you decide you're a career author, you have a career as an author. And that's, you know, remind yourself that, because this is not, you know, it's not the path to publishing is not a fair one. So, you know, you need to be able to tell yourself that you are one. But in the end, you know, to be financially stable, and I'm talking average, you know, 60 grand a year kind of idea, we're talking 6 successfully published books. Now, you know, I would love for all of my clients to get 6-figure deals with each book and, you know, just have money coming out their ears, because that means that I would make some good money too. But, you know, I know that that's not necessarily the most stable process. And I think that it's actually better that, you know, you build that sort of process, get up to those 6 books, and then you're actually getting royalties rather than these huge advances that you have to, you know, your book has to pay back anyway. So I've had it both ways and I like it both ways. But, you know, I think that just remind yourself that it's more, the more projects you have, the more you write, the more potential you will have to sell those books, to make that money, to get to that 6 successfully published books, et cetera, et cetera.
Absolutely. Well, I know Mary has to leave exactly at 8 p.m. So I want to open it up to the audience to ask us, either me or Mary, questions about either Half Outlaw, how it worked, the publishing, writing, anything. If you'll write it in the chat, that would be probably good, so we don't have to unmute. Yeah,
that'd be great. Yeah, if you put it in the chat. Sorry that we had 2 people do a wrestling bomb. I don't know how that happened. Pardon me, but it was 2 people, so I apologize for that.
no worries. And if we don't have any questions, I have some more.
Hit me.
Yes. Okay. We have one from David Hopkins. I'm glad you mentioned that it's coded language. Do you feel like the phrase "there isn't an audience for this book" feels like vague shorthand for publishers and agents to excuse racism in the industry? I mean, from an author's viewpoint, I say yes. Or at least it's unconscious bias. I would at least say that. Like, I don't think these people think that statement is racism, but it sends a lot of message. And I'm not the only like person of color who's an author to have received that comment. I have heard it from so many other ones. And to me, it's ridiculous because you have a marketing team who is good at their jobs, or else you wouldn't have hired them. So there's an audience.
Yeah, I would agree with Alex. I don't think it's consciously that they're, you know, saying like, oh, there's going to be, no one wants to read about, you know, a Latina author. But yeah, I do think that there has been, it's changed slowly. And I can't say that, you know, it's a very nuanced conversation, right? It's very complicated, but in the end, yes.
Yeah. We have Netta. I hope that's how I say your name. Sorry if I mispronounce it. How many rejections should you get before you change projects? So do you want to go, Mary?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I would say, you know, you should be working on your next project while your other project's out in submission. So that way, you know, you could send it out to 100 lit agents. And I know you're not supposed to throw spaghetti at the wall, but like, you kind of can a little bit, like just anybody who, if you write adult fiction, anybody who represents fiction, just, send it their way.
Yeah.
But while you're doing that, while you're waiting for these responses to come in, take that project and say no more working on it, and work on, because honestly, like, unless you get a real revise and resubmit from an agent, or in the case of an agented person, an editor, and by real, I mean lengthy letter, they're willing to get on the phone with you, and talk about revisions, that kind of thing, not just some like side note that's like, well, the character just didn't work for me.
Yeah.
Unless that happens, you're not going to be working on that book. You shouldn't be working on that book. Just move on and work on the next book. If it's out on submission, that's out on submission.
Yeah. Heather Flanagan, writing my first book, working with a ghost editor, should take me a couple months to finish a draft. Is it too soon to look for an agent?
No, I don't think so. I would just, have a list ready. It might change. A lot of agents are leaving, and a lot of agents come in. If you're looking at newer agents who are much hungrier, just check that they, are working with an established agency, if they don't have any sales, because it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be a bad agent. Alex took a risk on me, and it worked out. And so people take risks on agents, but, just have the conversation with them, talk to their other clients, and hopefully they're at an established agency.
Totally. Bethany, hi. Thank you. You wrote, I've heard you say you write 15 minutes a day and finish this book in just a few months. How does the story roll around in your mind and then you just expel it? Again, so happy for you. Thank you. So Half Outlaw was written, the first draft was written in a month and a half. And then I worked on it for about another year and a half. And then my third book that I wrote 15 minutes a day on that, and it took me about 3.5 months to finish the first draft. How do I do that? Yeah, I do let the story roll in my mind for a while. And thankfully, with Mary having to, like on the third book, Mary said, hey, send me a pitch. So I sent her a pitch. She said, it sounds kind of nice. Send me like a few pages. I sent her some pages. And then after I did that, I had a better idea. We got on the phone. I told her what the idea was, and she was like, no, that's the idea. So then she asked me to write an outline. And I was a pantser, which is basically, I used to just write a story without having any idea where it was going to go. And Mary said, no, you need to write an outline. And I felt like the reason she said this, maybe I'm wrong, I had issues with the plot on Half Outlaw, having to write how to finish the book, how to write the climax, how to have the plot done. So her telling me to write the outline was her saying, you have this issue, let's fix it. We don't have to deal with it. So writing 15 minutes a day was easy because I already had this whole outline of knowing where the story was going to go. And as I was working on it, things changed, but for the most part, I had a pretty set storyline. Yeah. And yes, I used Save the Cat Writes a Novel, which is fantastic.
Yeah. I as all of my clients know, I love you all, and you're all pantsers in the end. But when you're working with me and you're on book number 3, 4, 5, you can't just write a whole manuscript. And I don't want you to waste your time, basically, is what it comes down to, because you can't just write a whole manuscript, send it to me, and have me go like, there's nothing we can do with this. And some of you still do, and that's okay.
Yes.
But
yeah.
in the end, like, the reason I try to get my clients to write that outline, and just 10 pages, first 10 pages, the pitch and this outline, using this book, is because it sort of establishes the pace that you'll be at once you do publish. You're going to be writing probably a book a year. You're not going to have this space to sort of write this monster and then have then whittle it down. Again, that's flexible. Everybody's different. I don't want to force anybody in any way, but knowing Alex, I knew that she would take this advice and run with it. So that's kind of how that happened. And then you have, what's your pet peeve with writers? What do we do you wish we didn't do when trying to connect with you? Honestly, I don't really think it's fair of agents to kind of look down on writers and say, oh, these are our pet peeves. These are what's wrong with writers. It's not really, you don't know what's happening behind the scenes. You have no idea. Having been a writer myself, I understand that vividly. But I guess if you want some advice for how to reach out, I would say, avoid being too personal. Like if you found their private Facebook page and you post something about their, then it's a little weird. But if it's public information, that's fine. And then the other thing is on the flip side of that, being unaware of just how big the publishing industry is and how big the canon of what you're writing in is, so really not knowing the books that would be your target audience. So, there's a lot, for example, this is like the cliche example, but there's a lot of people trying to write the next Harry Potter when Harry Potter was huge. And they only read Harry Potter. They never read any other middle grade. They never read, they have no idea about the genre itself. And so that's an easy way for an agent to be like, this author doesn't know the genre they're writing in. And then, but I don't, I try to avoid these days saying I have a pet peeve because it's not really fair to writers, I think.
Yeah. Well, I think that's all the questions we have. Thank you for all the amazing comments that you had in the chat. Thank you, Mary, for hopping on this call and talking with me. And I'm glad I got to know you even more.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Exciting.
Thank you, everyone who showed up. I really appreciate this. Get your signed copies from Interrobang Books. You can order it online. If you're not in the DFW area, they'll send it to you. I've signed all of their copies that they have right now. So they have about 40. So there's plenty for people. And I have another launch party in Dallas tomorrow. If you want to come out, it's all on my social media pages. Thank you, Writing Workshops and Blake Kimsey, for hosting this. I really appreciate this. I love working with you all the time. And thank you all for all the love on Half Outlaw.
My pleasure. I can't wait to read this book. I hope everybody picks it up. Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Alex. Congratulations, Alex.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming. Bye.
Bye.